Good day and good evening to all who are attending. Thank you very much for joining us on the last Sunday in September. We've taken a rather unique step in terms of what we've done in this program so far, GemQuest, in that for the first time ever we're looking at synthetics, whereas up till now we've looked at the stones that are all of natural origin. And before we actually get into today, I wanted to do something differently, and that is let you know what's coming up at the beginning, so you know what we have ahead. Next month, being October, I actually will be presenting, and I'll be presenting the program that I'm going to be presenting to the Canadian Gemological Association at their live conference in Vancouver, the 21st to the 23rd of October. And I want everybody to know that that this is an excellent program. And if you haven't signed up to go to it, well worth following through. The lineup of speakers, myself accepted, are quite stellar. And so I think those of you who are wanting to learn from a group of experts at a good conference in a beautiful location, please follow through and contact Canadian Gemological Association and let them know that you're interested and willing to be a participant in their conference coming up next month. And in November, we're also hoping to do something special as well, another synthetics situation. But this is an interesting one because we're seeing more and more and more large and perfect synthetic diamonds out there. And so I thought it would be a valuable program for us to look at sourcing, production, and the properties of synthetic diamonds, and once again call upon the expertise of Ari Akavan, who is one of our guest speakers. Who is I hope kindly call him a synthetics nerd, but there are not a whole lot of people in the world that have his level of expertise, and he is actually going to look at the synthetics that have come out to be used to imitate and supplant diamonds in terms of their high levels of refractive index. So I think we'll learn not only about in synthetic diamonds, but those synthetic compounds that have been put together to simulate diamonds as well. So I think so we're going to be looking at next month in October at my title, which will be Rare and Exotic Mineral Gems, the New Precious. And that's the topic I'm going to be presenting as one of the keynote speakers at the Canadian Gemological Association. So I thought it would be interesting for everybody to find out a little bit about a group of gem minerals that they probably don't see very often, but I think we'll be seeing more often in the near future. So let's move forward to today. And today is looking at precious gem synthetics and a little bit about their history, their manufacture, their characteristics. And to help us do that today, I feel very lucky that I was introduced to Aria, who is a surgeon by trade, a reconstructive plastic surgeon, the kind of guy you really want if you look like me, so that you could somehow manage to look better. And the majority of his time spent outside of medicine, however, is in dealing with gemstones, whether in faceting rare and unusual materials or writing experience. Arya is involved in a wide range of the gem industry. He's particularly well known for his gemstone design work and faceting education content, and his work on popularizing both both synthetics and I hope that you will enjoy what he has to share with us. But when I was in Denver show, I came around a corner and I found this, to my absolute joy, the largest and best selection of synthetics I have ever seen in my life in one place. And this was put on by a company called RG crystals who originally were, I think, based in Russia, got smart, moved the heck out to Bangkok where the climate is political and otherwise is so much better. And Olga is their sales manager. And Olga will be working with Arya today to help fill us in about synthetic crystals because she works on the practical end of things where they make them. And I think what's amazing is what's happening and what has happened over the last 2 decades. The last 2 decades. We need to have a mute there somewhere. Huh. Anyway, RG Crystals is the world's largest supplier of raw created stones in the jewelry market, a leading expert in the field of single crystals growth. So for more than 25 years, they have created methods of growth and recrystallization, both synthetic and recreated crystals, which is one of those technologies I want to know more about. And they're used to work with materials available on the market nowadays, and they pioneer manufacturing systems. So thanks to innovative technologies, their company has been able to offer a wide range of products, including more than 20 types of crystals and synthetic materials, including quartz, corundum, stones that have undergone a high technology process and are close as possible to those found in nature, such as Colombian emeralds, ruby sapphires. So I'd like to say that one of the things that spurred me on to this as a topic was that I was talking with a very well-known gem appraiser, and he had been given a bag of 10 kilograms of sapphires and told by the owner of the bag that he bought these in the field. He knew that he bought them right at the mine, and he knew that they were all real. He just wanted to get them appraised and confirmed. And it turned out, to this gentleman's absolute horror, that 2/3 of the stones in the bag were man-made. They'd been thrown around in the dirt and made to look like just all the other crystals, except they were perfect. And so I think this broke this poor chap's heart to find out that the synthetics gems industry has been doing such a good job. And the people who are mining realizing that the extreme rarity of good stones makes it almost necessary in their minds to actually salt and the piles of gems that they're selling with synthetic gems. And so this is something we really need to be careful of. We think that when we're at the mines, we're going to get the real thing. We think that we buy from buyers in source countries that the cut stones we see are all real, but there is a strong tendency and a growing trend to including and fobbing off as real synthetic stones. So it serves us all well to be better educated than we may already be in our knowledge about synthetic stones, how they are identified, how they're made, and the distinguishing characteristics that make them unique as compared to real stones, because that difference is becoming harder and harder to ascertain. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Arya Akavan and Olga. And Olga, I'm hoping I pronounced your last name correctly, Tanskaya. Okay, so if we can turn on Aryan and Olga's microphones and let them orchestrate our education in the area of synthetic gems, I'm very much looking forward to learning from the two of you today. Thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you, Ray. So I will be running through a PowerPoint presentation, and Olga, given her extensive background in the actual practical side of things, will be chiming in kind of at the end of each mini section. Give me 5 seconds to figure out how to share my screen properly. All right. Pretty sure I've got it. All right. So if I did this right, then everybody should be seeing a PowerPoint, just a PowerPoint. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay. So we're going to have some fun. We're going to talk about the traditional synthetic gemstones. And just as a super brief background, since Ray already gave me an excellent introduction, I am a surgeon, but I have a chemistry degree. And as a rampant synthetics nerd, I have a very deep background in the physical chemistry and the like optics and other properties of synthetics, all of their like doping agents, production methods, things like that. And very much thank you to the folks at RG Crystals who basically, when I ran into them 5-6 years ago, were like, cool, here's some interesting stuff that we have under the desk that we don't normally show people. And that was very much appreciated from Olga's predecessor and then from Olga as well. So let's, oh, why is it not working? There we go. So anytime I do a gem talk, there's always a couple of like core things. If you listen to this talk, you should learn these things. So we're going to go over the most common growth methods for just the traditional synthetics. So just corundum, spinel, beryl, alexandrite. Like 95% of quartz is synthetic. I don't really like quartz, so I don't talk about it. And then we're also going to learn about key features for differentiating those naturals from the synthetics. All right, so for conflicts of interest, just like in medicine, we always talk about conflicts of interest. I have bought stuff from Olga in the past. I am not receiving any money from Olga for like talking about her in this lecture. I'm not receiving any money from anybody. I have no financial conflict of interest here. And then there's the photo credits below. All right, and then just some brief terminology. A synthetic, we're just going to use as any gem material that's grown in a lab. A boule is a cylinder that's grown either from a flame fusion technique or a melt technique, and we'll talk about those later. It looks like I forgot to put the definition of an ingot on there, but basically it's like a block instead of a cylinder, and we'll see pictures of those later. There's seed crystals, which are what the synthetics grow on top of. There are seed plates. So for certain types of synthetics, instead of having just a little bead, you have a sheet. And then there's the feedstock, which is the material that you use to actually turn into the gem. So before we can understand growing synthetics, we have to know how gems grow in nature. And there's lots of different ways. So for some of them, like gems in the desert, rainwater leaches into the soil, dissolves a whole bunch of stuff with it, gets carried around, eventually gets trapped in rock, and then over millions of years gets squeezed under pressure, and then crystals form. That's like quartz, opal, malachite. In some cases, there's magma that has dissolved water in it. And as that magma cools, the water comes out in this little pocket of high temperature and high pressure. And then as that cools, crystals come out. Those are hydrothermal pockets, and that's like emeralds, tourmaline, things like that. There's a bunch of other methods. But when we look at gems, some of these production methods are going to mimic natural production, and some are just totally different. So we'll talk about the first one. So flame fusion method is the oldest production method. It doesn't really mimic natural processes because it's just you're taking that feedstock, you're melting it down and using that to grow crystal. To grow gems with the flame fusion method, which is also the verneuil process, you start with a powdered feedstock, typically like corundum or spinel. You add your coloring agents, and then you put it in this giant machine. We've got a picture of it here. There's a little hammer that kind of taps on it. Some of that powder sprinkles downwards, goes through a super hot torch and melts. That molten material sits on top of a seed crystal. And then as time goes by, that seed crystal gets lowered and lowered and lowered. New molten stuff keeps landing on top of it. And eventually that creates your cylindrical boule. For the synthetics we're talking about, this is used for sapphire and spinel, but there's a huge number of other materials that can be produced by this method. And just brief history. First ever flame fusion method was 1880, but really real flame fusion started in 1891. Auguste Verneuil perfected the method, grew some rubies, and then kind of took it and ran with it. He worked on rubies first and then started doing blue sapphires. And then in 1914, basically other folks took a lot of the scientific publications around this, opened their own factories, and then we started getting industrial production, both for gem purposes and for like ball bearings or other like technical industry stuff. Hopefully this video will work. I don't know if it will. So that is a row of flame fusion furnaces from the old Java factory. They have since shut down. And then Olga, if you want to chime in here, you guys picked up most of their stuff. And did you take their, did you get their equipment as well, or was it just?
No, not equipment, but just the products, spinel
Gotcha.
and corundum. Yep.
Awesome. And then, oh, there we go. All right, so For flame fusion production, these crystals are always cylindrical. They have a tapered end at one end that's like pointy. That's where the seed crystal was. They have a cap. Sometimes that cap end has a little bit of like crystal formation on top. Sometimes it doesn't. In this top picture, you can see it very clearly has a cap of a different color. If you ever see a split bool that is 100% corundum, the only time that you ever see a split bool is in corundum, and that's for reasons we'll talk about later. If you see a whole bool, basically everything else. There's a common thing that you will see in the field where flame fusion spinel, which sometimes can have a hexagonal instead of a cylindrical appearance, will be ground down into what looks like a hexagonal prism of like aquamarine or emerald, and they'll glue matrix to the surface. Just be careful, look for the key features of flame fusion synthetics, which we'll talk about later. So characteristic defects that you'll see in this, there's a few very, very like key ones. The first are the curved striae. So if you look at that picture on the right, you'll see the split bool of corundum, and you've got these curved little lines. That's where that powder has slowly fallen down, melted, and stuck to the bool. If you see that, 100% it is flame fusion. There's nothing else it can be. The other is the external rind. So when you're growing these crystals, the coloring agents, depending on like the temperature and the amount of oxygen in their environment, can change their charge. So like iron, for example, can be in a 2+ charge or a 3+ charge. So the outside, because it's exposed to more oxygen and there's a lot more basically electrical charged stuff happening, the outside can have a little bit of a different color. If you see that, that is diagnostic. There's nothing else it can be. The other one for spinel, at the seed crystal end, if you look at the bottom picture, we have what's called surface crazing, which is a bunch of parallel cracks. Typically they're superficial. Sometimes they can run a little bit deeper. And then there's a couple of other things. So these crystals have a bit more internal strain. Their optics aren't necessarily 100% perfect. They're like reasonably close. And the pleochroism in flame fusion gems won't necessarily 100% match their natural counterparts. And then speaking of splitting the high strain corundums, so here's a video. So if you heard that little click, all this person did was just touch that piece of ruby, just barely touch it to the saw. And that internal strain is so high that that little tap to the saw just cuts right in half through the entire piece. All right. There we go. The last thing to talk about, and then I'll have Olga chime in, is that flame fusion production has what's called the Verneuil code. And I've been trying to dig into this for the past like 3-4 years. This was a systematic approach to generating new colors of flame fusion products. The earliest records that I could find of this were from the early 1900s, and Verneuil himself used like systematic numbering schemes for experiments into different colors of rubies. It looks like once the Java factory got started in 1914, that systematic numbering system got expanded, but they kept the same principles. So for example, numbers 30 through 39 are always blue sapphire. Numbers 40 through 49 are always color change sapphire colored with vanadium. And as the numbers go up, either new agents get added to modify the color a little bit, or that same agent concentration goes up. So for example, if you look at that top picture of the rubies, that whole top row is just a little bit more chromium each time, giving it a little bit more of that ruby color. Numbers 100 through 199 were spinel, and then 200 up were experimental. There are some sapphires that are in that numbering. There's some spinels that were in that numbering. There was like colored rutile and a few other things. And I'm working on a collection and a database for all of this, because nowadays there's some manufacturers who are changing up numbering systems. So I will let Olga chime in if you've got anything else to add about flame fusion stuff.
Maybe the only thing I could add, it's something that we can call a modified flame fusion method. I think we send you some samples, right, of number 78 green color.
Oh yeah.
In a full ball. So yeah, we have these full balls that we don't need to split. So we can make it in ruby, let's say number 5, number 7, which is more pink, and one which is more dark. That's number 78, as I told, the green one. And of course, do you want me to share some pictures maybe? What's better to do?
Yeah, if you've got
Yeah,
pictures, I can stop
because
sharing and you can start sharing.
yeah, just let me try to show you that number 78, which is not split. Oh yeah, I cannot. I'm sorry. Yeah, I can try it now, right? So can you see it now? Yeah, does
Yeah,
it
we
work?
can see that.
Yeah, so that's number 78, which can be, so this ball that it's sliced, so that's like 6 centimeters, can be up to 10, 12 centimeters, I mean the length. Then this beautiful Alexandrite ball, which is very light, but that was huge. I think around maybe 4 inches, this one, again, not split. And then, yeah, I unfortunately, I don't have a picture of a red one. So let me stop sharing. Yeah, so sometimes we can release the stress, so we don't need to split it. So you can even see a full ball, like spinel balls that you have on your picture, not
Nice.
split into halves. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. I forgot about that, but that is very interesting stuff. Those number 78 pools are very large. So
Yeah.
we'll move on to melt pulled synthetics. So this is different from flame fusion. In flame fusion, you've got a powder that falls down, melts, and then the boule gets pulled downwards. But in these methods, your seed crystal gets dipped into basically a bathtub of molten crystal, and then that seed gets pulled upwards. So your boule gets kind of formed going up. The oldest method is the Czochralski method. It's used for like technical industry. It produces very high quality crystals. Right now, it's used to grow sapphire, spinel, and alexandrite, but there's a huge number of synthetics that you won't typically see that are more like unusual industrial, technical industry stuff. When we look at the appearance of things grown by these methods, they're almost always very large diameter, always whole boules. The outside is typically polished looking, like they don't actually polish it themselves. That's just how it grows. Diameter can be like 2 to 5 inches. I think I've got a 3-kilo gem grown by this method sitting on my desk. And typically there's no surface defects. This also produces a boule because it's a cylinder. When we look at the key defects in this, they're very hard to see, typically under 50 times magnification, but very characteristic. You'll see scattered pinpoint bubbles, like little gas bubbles with a little bit of color banding around them. And in general, when you look at the stone, if you look under polarized light and immersion, you'll be able to see a little bit of color banding. Sometimes these crystals will be heated at high temperature for a long period of time, and that kind of blends out the color banding, but you'll still see the little bubbles. Oh, and then Olga, if you want to chime in about pulled stuff, I'll talk about the actual materials in a little bit.
Yeah, so maybe I think you have some pretty nice pictures of rough stones, because I prepared some pictures of faceted stones. So do you want me to show them now or maybe later?
Yeah,
What's better?
We can do the faceted stones at the end.
At the end, yeah. So yeah, let me do that at the end.
Gotcha. All right, so the next method up, so we're kind of going up the ranking of high quality growth methods. So flame fusion gives you kind of the best cost value, then pulled methods give you higher quality. Flux gives you even closer to the natural appearance. So in flux grown gems, you use, instead of dissolving the stones or instead of melting down your feedstock, you dissolve it in something else. Whatever you're dissolving it in is called a flux. That's typically some kind of weird salt like molybdenum oxide or like lead oxides or like lead carbonate, all kinds of toxic stuff. The gemstones dissolve in that, and then you cool it back down. And just like if you're making rock candy as a kid or things like that, you'll get crystals that come out of solution. And there's lots of different ways to do flux growth, but that's the basic process. Nowadays, that's used to grow like corundums, and it's used to grow alexandrites, sometimes beryl, and I think Chatham is really one of the only big producers who's still using those methods. But historically, there were a couple of other things grown, and some of the best spinel that I've ever seen was grown by this method. When we look at how these crystals form, the crystals typically show their native crystal habit. So for spinel, you'll see octahedra. For beryl, you'll see hexagonal prisms. And they have 100% perfect pleochroism as compared to their natural counterparts. But since we're growing this by melting it down into some other non-gem substance, a lot of times that gets included in the gemstone. So we'll see what we call flux fingerprints, like little fingerprint pads of literally just the flux material inside the stone. And sometimes you can get different crystals forming if the flux gets incorporated, and you'll see little plates of either metal or other unusual crystals that just kind of form inside the stone. Olga, does RG crystals do anything by flux?
Not anymore, honestly. So I still have some stock of rough crystals left, only emerald. Unfortunately, honestly, I never had the chance to see flux spinel or flux ruby. I think they're pretty rare now.
Yeah.
And sometimes I find some traces on the market, but I didn't have a chance to see that. So we stopped doing flux as it's too expensive. We're getting small crystals, pretty included, a lot of cracks. So the yield is not that high. So that's why we are focusing on hydro or Czochralski methods that give us huge crystals. So yeah, that's a beautiful method. I mean, the stones are really amazing, but yeah, not for the market.
Yeah, they're usually like really badly included and cracked.
Yeah.
Speaking of hydrothermal method, my favorite. So this is the closest that you can get to like how gems grow in nature. So normally, if you like soak an emerald in water, nothing's going to happen. Your emerald is not magically going to dissolve if you take a shower. But if you seal an emerald in a high pressure, high temperature bathtub of water, and you really cook it, that emerald will dissolve into the water. Doesn't normally happen in like just out in the environment, but deep inside the earth, that's what happens. So we take this method and we copy it. So we basically put the feedstock. So sometimes it's whole bits of natural emerald that's just lower grade. Sometimes it's emerald powder or whatever. We'll put it inside that sealed autoclave. And remember, this is where we use seed plates. So instead of a little bead of crystal, we have a sheet either of synthetic or natural material. We put it under high temperature, high pressure, that feedstock dissolves. And then the emerald or quartz or whatever you're growing will crystallize on top of that seed crystal. And this forms an ingot. So like a little block, or if you think of little gold bars, something like that, instead of a boule or a crystal. Typically, this is used for quartz or beryl, so like emerald, aquamarine, bixbyite. Historically, people would use this to grow corundum, but again, that's not very cost effective. Extremely high quality, but not really great for this current market. And just as a little picture to kind of see how things go, here's an example of what it looks like when you grow quartz with this method. You see the feedstock at the bottom, you see the seed plates on top. As the feedstock dissolves, it crystallizes back out on those seed plates, which get bigger and bigger. So what do these look like? Well, you've got ingots, so typically little blocks, sometimes thin blocks, sometimes big chunky blocks. There's a seed plate in the inside, and you can see that on the amethyst that's on the top right. That white little line is the seed plate. There's always a little surface irregularity parallel to the seed plate. And sometimes that looks like a bunch of bumps. Sometimes it's a bunch of little spikes, but it's always there. There's sometimes the wire that was used to hold in the seed plates. And then the pleochroism is 100% perfect compared to the natural counterpart. Bottom left, we can see hydrothermal pad parashra. Bottom right, hydrothermal emerald. Top right, hydrothermal quartz. Now, with this method, there's a couple of key defects that you see. So the most common, and sometimes you can see this like just with the naked eye, are what we call columnar subgrain boundaries. So when you grow something by this method, if it's grown very, very slowly, you'll get one perfect, even, smooth crystal. But if it's grown a little bit faster, like to make it economical to do so, from that seed plate, you get a bunch of little columns of crystals that kind of grow upwards and fuse together to form one stone. And if you look at the bottom picture and the picture on the bottom right, you can see in some circumstances, you can actually see where those little crystals have fused together. The other inclusions that you commonly see are called nail head spicules. So like either a little bubble or a little crystal inclusion that has kind of a stabby bit that comes out. Sometimes you'll just see the seed plate, it gets left in the crystal. And then sometimes if the seed plate has been removed, you'll see a little border of bubbles or tiny inclusions all in a perfect sheet. And you know that that was right above where the seed crystal was. Couldn't find a good picture of it. Olga, do you have any thoughts on hydrothermal stuff?
Yeah, maybe I could show you some beautiful pictures of rough crystals that we could get. So we have experience like maybe more than 27 years of using this method. So please let me show you some very, very nice Colombian color crystals. So that's a Colombian, how we call that? We cannot call it a Colombian emerald, right? So we have to call that created emerald of Colombian color. But you can see these beautiful, beautiful inclusions here. So, and the color is like super, super attractive, this one. And then you were speaking about beryl, right? So we could make this beautiful red beryl or red emerald. I was recently told that I better not call it big bite, but red emerald. I mean at the show, because the natural one is super, super extremely rare, as you know, I think. So we could get these beautiful colors and some assorted colors like shades of green, blue, orange, pink, even a bicolor beryl, this one, green and red, and a very nice morganite. I think they were not super popular on the market, honestly, for some reason. Sorry, let me end my sharing here. Sorry, because some colors are weird. Some of them are included, but we could get this very nice Paraiba color also, which you probably saw before. But emerald is something that everyone knows, but not like maybe not the perfect pink morganite or something else. But yeah, that's one of the best methods, honestly, I think.
Yeah. And I'll also chime in. The orange and pink material that Olga showed a picture of is both strongly pleochroic. So in one direction you see orange, in the other direction you see pink, and it has a strong color change. So depending on the lighting you use, it will be like a very, very bright pink, almost tourmaline color. And in other lighting conditions, it'll be a peachy gold orange color. And then the last one for hydrothermal beryl is there is a blue to red color change hydrothermal beryl that was produced by Tyrus once. Olga, I'll bring some for you for at Tucson if you're going to be in Tucson this year.
Please, I want to see. Isn't it a kunzite color, like dark purple color? No,
it's like a berry red, so it's like the manganese 3+ color, and then it changes to like a pure blue sapphire color.
Unbelievable! Please, just show it to me.
Yeah, it's very strange.
Thank you.
So we'll go back to our little talk here. All right. So the other goal of this talk was to talk about how can you identify these in the field? How, like if you're looking at a cut stone, how do we know what it is? So let's talk about corundum first. So synthetic or natural, corundum has a refractive index 176, a dispersion of 17, hardness of 9. That's the same regardless of how you grow it. Almost all synthetic corundum that you'll see is flame fusion, which makes it easy to identify, but there's increasing production of pulled corundum, so the Czochralski method. And the key feature there is that the color is going to be perfectly even. You're not going to see that little exterior rind that we talked about. Hydrothermal material is even less common and a little bit easier to differentiate under microscopy. You can find it in basically every color. And then let's talk about how to identify it. So by far easiest way to do it is just look at the stone, try to find those curved striae. Here's a picture from Richard Hughes. If you see, you can very clearly see here's a faceted stone, just blatantly obvious curved striae. 100%, there's nothing else this can be. This is flame fusion. And then you check the refractive index to tell if it's corundum or spinel or whatever, but it's flame fusion. The other test you can do is look for that rind. Remember, some of the flame fusion material has that color border where you'll see one color on the outside and another color in the core. In natural material with color zoning, you don't get that perfectly half circle shape. So if you see that, that's flame fusion. If we can't see those, the next step is going to be to look at it under higher magnification. So look for pinpoint bubbles from pulled material. Look for flux fingerprints. Look for the columnar subgrain of hydrothermal material. You're probably not going to run into these unless you're dealing with like very large stones or things that people are deliberately trying to pass off as natural. And worst case scenario, if all else fails, you can send it off, have somebody do spectroscopy on it, have somebody do chemical analysis on it. If you get to the point where you've got to do that, then we're getting into like tricky range. Let's look at spinel. So spinel has a refractive index of 1.72, dispersion of 26, hardness of 8 to 8.5, depending on who you ask. It's grown by most of the methods. Flux material, I've only ever seen once. Nobody grows it anymore. There's a couple of research labs in Russia and Ukraine that will occasionally grow it for technical purposes, but it never really comes to market. So you don't really have to worry about that. There's a couple of key features. In natural spinel, there's almost always a huge amount of iron, so much so that you can drag it with a magnet. But in synthetics, it typically doesn't. So if you are testing a stone and you just want to hold a magnet to it, if it doesn't stick to the magnet, it's probably synthetic. It's not a guarantee though. Another test that suggests it's synthetic is fluorescence. Typically, natural spinel has a lot of iron and that quenches the fluorescence, meaning if you shine a UV light on it, nothing's going to happen. But in some extremely pure natural stones and most synthetics, they will light up like mad under fluorescence. Here's a super important thing for flame fusion. Flame fusion spinel is not actually spinel. It's what we call beta corundum. So when you try to grow spinel with the flame fusion method, it gets really cracked, it falls apart, it crumbles, it explodes, whatever. And in early production attempts, it was found out that if you add a little bit of sapphire powder in there, it stabilizes the crystal. So most flame fusion spinel now is actually a combination of spinel and sapphire. And that changes its properties a little bit. It moves it a little bit away from spinel and a little bit towards sapphire. So it's got a higher refractive index, like you can see at the bottom. It's got a little bit less dispersion. It's got a little bit more hardness. And that's just something to remember and keep in mind, because when we're doing testing, just check the damn RI first. If it's too high, it's synthetic. You will not see a natural spinel that has a refractive index that high. And then, of course, we can do our other basic tests. So does it have curved striae? If so, it's got to be flame fusion. There's nothing else it can be. We can check for ridiculous fluorescence. Most natural spinel are not going to glow with like a nuclear blue color or an eyeball searing electric orange. They can, but that's so incredibly uncommon that if you see that, it should really move you towards suspecting a synthetic. And then again, we can look under 50 times magnification and check for other standard things for pulled methods or flux methods. And if all else fails, send it off. We'll look at barrel. So barrel, hydrothermal barrel and flux barrel, functionally the same as natural barrel. Same refractive index, same dispersion, same hardness. Excuse me. You can only grow it by two methods. You're never going to see it flame fusion. It just doesn't work. It's available in a large number of colors, including some that you don't see in nature, which is a lot of fun. And thankfully, since almost all of this material is hydrothermal, it's very easy to tell if you're paying close enough attention. So first off, we're going to look for those subgrain boundaries, because any hydrothermal barrel is going to have those real, and sometimes it's hard to see. You've got to look under like dark field illumination or mess with your lighting conditions, but you should be able to see it. You can also do it under immersion. And then of course, while you're checking those, check for flux fingerprints and things like that. Typically, if you see a flux grown barrel, it's going to be from Chatham and it'll be advertised as Chatham, and they're not going to pass it off as anything else because they really like building their brand, but it's just something to keep in mind. If you don't see any suspicious features, look under 50 times. look for those same features. And if all else fails, then again, just send it off for definitive testing. The last thing we're going to talk about is alexandrite, and then I'll turn it over completely to Olga. So alexandrite is just chrysoberyl that has chromium in it. That added chromium gives it its characteristic color change. I want to be very, very clear that there is no such thing as flame fusion alexandrite. You cannot grow chrysoberyl by flame fusion. It does not work. So what a lot of vendors will do, and this is totally unethical, they'll get flame fusion sapphire that has some extra vanadium in it, and that gives it a color change. Not as good, definitely not as good, but it gives it a color change. And they'll say, oh, this is alexandrite. Well, when you check the refractive index, it's wrong. And when you look at it, there's some curved striae. It's not alexandrite, it's just flame fusion sapphire. Now, the key feature of alexandrite is obviously its color change. And that color change is extremely variable. At the top right, you can see a picture from RG Crystals that I stole off of your website. Thank you. And at the bottom, you can see pictures of materials from Creative Crystals, which went bankrupt in the 1970s. That color change that you see depends a huge amount on the initial growth conditions, the temperature, the amount of chromium that's added. And one of the easiest ways to differentiate natural from synthetic is use the too good to be true test. If you see a piece of alexandrite that has an amazing color change, no brown color in it whatsoever, and is being sold for less than a couple $1,000s or some exorbitant price, it's probably synthetic. Like use good judgment there. The other thing for alexandrite is that it features what we call the Usambara effect. And that's more of an effect that's important for cutters, but you can see it when you're looking at the stone in real life and can be diagnostic as well. The bigger your stone, the less green color it will have and the more red color it will have. The less of a color change it will have and even more of a red color it will have. And the pictures on the right-hand side show you a small stone on the top and a large stone on the bottom. And you can see that for the small stone, you can very clearly see the different pleochroic colors. You can see the green, you can see the blue, you can see the yellow, you can see the orange. In the bottom one, just from the stone becoming bigger, you lose a lot of those interesting colors. All right, so how do we identify the cut stones? The smell test. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. Check under 50 times magnification, look for those same flux features, those same pulled features, those pinpoint bubble inclusions. And then if all else fails, send it off for testing. Most alexandrite is grown for laser use, and as such has to be extremely pure, but most of it that occurs in nature has a lot of iron, has a lot of other elements added. And those will immediately show up on a, let's say, Gemo ramen. So that's an easy way to do it. So from here, I will turn it over to Olga, and then I think we may have time to answer questions at the end. All right, so Olga, whatever you wanted to share.
I'm sorry. So do you want me to add something about alexandrite also?
Yes, please.
Yes, so as there are, let's say, two types of alexandrite, which one is absolutely not an alexandrite. It's a sapphire, as you told, right? So, and the price range is super different, right? So for sapphire with color change effect, the price per kilo, I mean the rough stones, can be, let's say, 300, 500 per kilo, right? And for Chokhralsky one, which for normal alexandrite, the price is gonna be around $20,000-$30,000 per kilo. So it's a big difference. So what you can clearly see in sapphire instead, I mean, in comparison with Chokhralsky alexandrite, that the sapphire usually shows shades of blue, purplish, and gray colors, and in yellow light it shows pinkish red shades, but it never shows green. So I never had the chance to see a real green in the sapphire, but not in alexandrite, right? It shows beautiful green, beautiful strong blue colors. And another fact that I recently knew about alexandrite, I mean the lab-grown one, that the natural one is usually bichroic. Please tell me if I'm not correct, but I think it should be correct. But the synthetic one is trichroic, meaning that you see red, blue, and even yellow color, right? So honestly, you can get this brown shade, I think, Yes, and regarding the price, that's for sure. If you see that it's cheap, it's not a real one. So let me show you just maybe one picture with a beautiful example of created Alexandrite, but actually that's a sapphire. So we made this carving, and you see even in sapphire, you cannot see green or dark blue, it's just purple and pink, but how nice is the color change of it here still. So yeah. So do you want me to add some information about any other methods or materials?
Yeah. So do you have any pulled spinel that you can show?
Full spinel, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So do you prefer me to show raw crystals or faceted stones?
I think both would be good.
Both would be good. Just give me a second, please. So the spinel, I mean the Chukhalsky spinel that we are getting now has some weird shades of bright blue, like neon blue. I think you already had this in your presentation. Just give me a second, please. Oh yeah, maybe let me show the cutstones, please. Sorry, I'm just a little bit sleepy already, I think. I'm so sorry.
It's 2 a.m. in
So,
Bangkok, so it's
yep,
understandable.
that's what I wanted to show. So that's a Chukhalsky spinel, what I was talking about, the cobalt blue, and in UV light it shows the strong, beautiful pink color.
Yeah.
And it's very blue at the same time, because I think the natural cobalt spinel, what they call cobalt, it's usually in shades of gray and blue, right? Not that bright, I suppose. So
Yeah.
that's also my favorite one, the cobalt blue spinel, some fancy distorted heart shape, and the purple spinel that we don't get that often, honestly. I mean, it's pretty rare color even for synthetic spinel.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think that's all. Maybe if you have some questions, I'm sorry. Let me stop. I'm so sorry. Let me stop there.
So I've got a quick question for you, Olga. Do you ever see red or purple flame fusion spinel?
Honestly, not purple for sure. Not red also. I think you have in your collection the closest to red is number 140, which
Yeah.
doesn't exist anymore. I mean,
Right.
we have like maybe 5 pieces left from the Jeva, but not red or purple. I wish I could see that. That would be amazing if you could do that.
Gotcha. I have a couple of pieces of the red material, like red flame fusion spinel, but it's all
Really?
very, very cracked. It's mostly falling apart and it's not really usable.
Yeah, I think so. That's just not the gem quality. I think we can get that, but yeah, not for faceting or something.
Yeah. Ray, do you want us to look through chat and see if there's any questions? No, you're still muted.
There's one question in the chat at the moment. Why grow amethyst?
So that's a great question. And I honestly don't know how the economics of it work, but somewhere between 95 and 98% of amethyst at one point, and I think this was a report from GIA or maybe AGL, 95 to 98% of all amethyst available on the market was synthetic, grown by the hydrothermal method. And you'd think that amethyst having its reputation as a fairly inexpensive material would mean that there's no economic motivation to grow it. But I guess if the incentives line up, like quartz has been produced synthetically since the 40s in huge amounts, in huge sizes. And I guess if it's cheap enough per unit to grow, then it could be cheap enough compared to natural material to where it's fine to do that. I really don't have a good answer to that. It's one that I ask.
I think it's still cheaper. I mean, and you get these huge crystals. You just need to slice the seed out. It should be still cheaper than a natural one.
Yeah.
Color is better.
Okay, it looks like there's another question. So does the feedstock in most methods used generally consist of natural ground stones, or can it simply be element powders? So for corundum, for example, that's typically like reagent grade material, or at least historically was. You would get pure, completely impurity-free aluminum oxide powder, and then you would deliberately add in however much of your chromium or your vanadium or your whatever else. I think for beryl, people are now, and I think Olga can probably answer this better than I can, but for beryl, people are very much switching to using natural beryl that's just really low quality.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely true. Yeah, and usually we even use. So it depends on what color are we producing. I mean, we separate, right, the dark Zambian color and the brighter, lighter Colombian color. So we use rough, I mean, natural rough of different origins, but yeah, it's still natural. And regarding corundum, I have something to add, honestly. So yeah, you're absolutely right. That's a powder, especially for flame fusion method. I mean, only chemicals. But we had this experience in producing HDSM. I mean, the method. I think we didn't discuss it. So that's horizontal direction solidification method. And we actually used the natural ruby for that. But please just let me show what we've got. I still keep this piece at stock because I don't think we're gonna ever sell it. So can you see amount of inclusions? So it's like full of inclusions, full of bubbles. I mean, and it's pink. It's not red at all. So yeah, that's what we got after our experiments with the natural ruby rough. I mean, as a source material. So yeah, mostly besides beryl, it's chemical composition. Yeah, that's true.
Gotcha. And I think there was a brief period of time in the late 60s and early 70s when Creative Crystals was using natural alexandrite as their feedstock. And then they stopped doing that because their color was inconsistent. And then it looks like part 2 of that question was, what about the seed crystal? For quartz, sometimes the seed crystal is natural because you can find natural quartz that has extremely high purity. You can also recycle your synthetic material and use a synthetic as a seed plate. Olga, do you have more information?
That's true. That's true. I mean, some time ago, I don't know, let's say 20 years ago, we started with a natural seed, maybe not even one of them, right? More. And then after producing bigger and bigger crystals with each time, we still can use our grown crystals. I mean, yeah, they're bigger, they're pretty clean, wide and long, right? So yeah, now we are basically using synthetic seed. That's true.
Gotcha. There's a comment that asks about the commercial method used for sapphires in the watch industry. So that's a good question. That used to be flame fusion. Nowadays, there's methods of growing sapphire that we didn't talk about, like chiropolis, that can grow. I think the largest that I've seen in person was 80 kilograms, and we had to like put it on a pallet with wheels because we couldn't move it anywhere. So nowadays, for uses for like watches or cell phones or like screens for things, those are typically grown by other very, very specialized techniques.
So, yeah, I would say that that's Chiropoulos and that's Chukhalsky. Absolutely, that's Chukhalsky, because sometimes we are supplying craft materials, I mean, sapphire and ruby for watch industry, because now we are getting sapphire both light, medium, and dark saturations up to 7-8 kilo in one, so they're pretty huge. And regarding Chiropoulos, we keep a big stock of white sapphire. I hope you can visit our office one day to see them in live. So one of the pieces, again, let me show you, please. That's a funny crystal. It's around 15 kilos, I suppose. So that's a really huge one. But what is possible to make by Chiropoulos method are both like up to 200 kilos, 250 kilos. So they're really huge. But yeah, regarding the question, answering the question, that's a Chukhalsky and Chiropoulos method for sure. Yeah, not flame fusion anymore.
Could I pose a question here if you don't mind? Part of what was mentioned in the introduction was talk of the remelting of actual natural crystals into a new form, which is not necessarily truly synthetic, but it has synthetic interventions to give it a better color. So could you talk a tiny bit about that, please?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I guess that was about hydrothermal method. Arya, what do you think?
So,
Well, go ahead.
oh, sorry. So the idea of using natural, so, and Ray, correct me if I'm understanding you wrong, but basically, so taking natural gem material. So let's say low grade ruby that's either very included or doesn't have great color. So low grade ruby, and then doing something to it to grow, to use that as a feed and grow a new crystal. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that or pieces of crystals that are melded together to create a new crystal and basically have the color and the characteristics of a natural,
Yeah.
without necessarily showing the curved lines or bubbles, but looking like with some kind of infusion of chromium, either through absorption or through mixing once it becomes fluid.
Yeah. So what you're describing is exactly what creative crystals used to do with low-grade natural alexandrite. They would take like these giant bags of small pieces of low-grade alexandrite, natural alexandrite, that was either heavily included or very fractured or like slightly not the color that they wanted. They would just dump all of it into their equipment and they would run it through, and it would basically, those small crystals would all kind of dissolve and melt, and then they would fuse and form one single giant crystal that basically averaged out all of the properties of each of those individual pieces. And for the most part, that gave them better alexandrite. But a lot of times, because like, let's say you've got 2 or 3 stones in there that are just like really crap, that can spoil the entire crystal. So every so often they would get an alexandrite that was like a poop brown color.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. So not ideal. But yeah, so exactly what you're talking about, it's definitely possible. People do it. That's what Olga and RG Crystals do for emeralds. So yeah.
And how do you determine that from real?
So because it's still been processed in that same method. So like creative crystals was the flux method, or RG crystals, it's you guys do hydrothermal for that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So because it was all natural material, but it's still been through that same process, you'll still see the same inclusions and features that you would from that process.
The creation of emeralds that had 2 and 3 phase inclusions, I thought was something of a coup, and I'm wondering if that's been perfected now even more so.
Yeah, we can get I'm sorry, Ari. Yeah, we can get 2 phase inclusions. Honestly, we could never get a 3 phase inclusion, unfortunately. Yeah, but 2 phase, yeah, that's easy. That's what we see.
I'm going to look at some of the other comments. What about the characteristic of stress birefringence of synthetics under crossed polars? I didn't mention it for ID. So that is a great one. You can very, very easily see that in flame fusion products. Unfortunately, even in some flame fusion products, if you heat a synthetic at a high enough temperature for a long enough period of time, that completely disappears. And I'll give you an example. There is an old East German production of ruby that was flame fusion. And after the crystals were produced, normally you'd have to split it because it's under so much strain. Instead, they heated it to, I think, 1600 degrees Celsius for 1,500 hours. And it completely got rid of 100% of all of the stress. It got rid of all of the curved striae, and functionally, it looked like natural material. It had some like tiny features that you'd have to see under like 100 times magnification. But nowadays, like the annealing process is a little bit easier. It turns out you don't have to do it for that long or that hot. And if somebody's really motivated enough to do it, they're going to do it. So you're either going to see the curved striae along with stress birefringence and all that kind of stuff, or you won't see any of them. So it's a lot easier to just like carry around a 10x loop in your hand and just look at the rock in daylight, as opposed to like carrying around cross polars. Looks like next question, general price per carat range for polished synthetic rubies of the higher quality, 2 to 7 carats. So my market for cut stones is very different from Olga's market for cut stones.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I typically will do hydrothermal rubies or Czochralski rubies in like very dedicated custom cuts. And depending on the level of complexity, I will go anywhere from $50 a carat to $200 a carat. Olga, I think, what are you guys' prices?
No, I mean, Arya, we don't have that level of faceting, honestly, because we have faceting factories here in Bangkok, and I have some guys who are making precision cuts, but I mean, we are getting like 20 stones per 1 hour, not 1 stone per week. So yeah, of course, but our price range, of course, it's a little bit less again due to the faceting. So the standard cost is from $30 per carat for Czochralski method or HDSM or Stepanov ruby, and up to $50 per carat for hydrothermal ruby, which is also so limited. I mean, we don't have that much rough already. We don't produce by hydrothermal anymore. Hydrothermal method, I'm sorry. So yeah, that's like from 30 to 50 per carat.
Yeah, and it's kind of a shame that the no hydrothermal corundum is being produced anymore, because it's really like that is some good stuff.
That's such a pity. Honestly, I really hope we're gonna restart the project again, because we're getting even beautiful inclusions in those rubies and sapphires. Sapphires were coming in a strange, weird color sometimes, like close to cobalt spinel, something like vivid blue. Yeah, but I hope we're gonna get back to that. I hope so much also.
Yeah. All right, next question. With so many synthetics on the market, are there still natural stones available? The answer is very much yes. Even though synthetics are so prevalent, the vast majority of stones are natural. And there are some stones that are either cost prohibitive or technically prohibitive to make synthetic. So like tourmaline, topaz, notoriously difficult, just like it's really hard to produce. And there's some stones that just cannot be grown synthetically. No one's even remotely close to doing it. So things like tanzanite, I think scapolite still hasn't been, yeah, I think those are just like the common ones off the top of my head, but there's still a very large number of natural gems that just cannot be grown in the lab. So I think we don't have to worry about those quite yet. Next question, would a natural seed crystal or plate with any imperfections or inclusions create more of those imperfections in the synthetic material? That's a question for Olga.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely. That's why I mean, we don't grow every gem with inclusions. Unfortunately, we are very limited. So we can do just range of beryl colors like emerald, right, or red beryl. So yeah, that's absolutely true. We try to select the plates, the seeds as clean as possible to get the clean crystals. But usually we add some inclusions on purpose. I'm sorry. So yeah, that's correct. The answer is yes.
Okay. It looks like the next question, and this is, I have a show and tell when there's a moment for a synthetic you might not have seen before. Ray,
do you want to go through the rest of the questions first? I'll jump in at the end. Is probably
okay. Yeah. So we can keep going. Are the two-phase inclusions in synthetic emeralds of any particular shape, or is it similar to any of the characteristic shapes from those localities? Are the two-phase inclusions formed spontaneously, or are they induced by some kind of special process?
That's spontaneously. I mean, we didn't do it by purpose. We just found them occasionally in a few crystals. I mean, there are much more. We just don't check every crystals for two-phase inclusion. Honestly, I'm not that good at two-phase inclusions in a real emerald. So for me, it's very hard to compare. As far as I remember, that was in a round shape. I mean, the gas bubble was round. I'm not mistaken. But yeah, honestly, I don't have much information about that.
Gotcha. And then it looks like our last question is, can you comment on synthetic forsterite as a tanzanite imitator? And oh, yes, I can. So John, thank you for this question. I love synthetic forsterite. So synthetic forsterite is basically, you can think of it as a subtype of peridot, just synthetic peridot. And you can add different coloring agents to give it different properties. When you add cobalt to it, it gives the material a very, very characteristic dichroism of blue in one direction and purple in the other. Technically, it's trichroic. There's a little bit of pink in there, but it's hard to see in the actual material. When you cut it, depending on how you orient it, it will look like a very, very nice tanzanite. But I've also seen some crystals that have been cut where the majority of the color that shows up is a mix between purple and pink. And in that case, it looks like one of those like fancy tanzanites that's very much on the pink side or very much on the purple side, like that incredibly limited find from Afghanistan a couple of years ago, where it was definitely like zoisite, it was definitely tanzanite, it just had a very unusual color. I will throw in that there are other doping agents that you can add to forsterite that will give it other very, very interesting colors. There was a forsterite that was strongly trichroic between, I think it was orange, yellow, and bright pink. And that came out of a lab in Japan in the 80s and 90s. They were doing just experiments on other properties of forsterite. There was a forsterite that has chromium in it, where the pleochroism is green, blue, and purple. I have a couple of pieces in my collection, and they look almost exactly like natural cornerupine from Tanzania. And then, of course, if you don't add anything to it, it's just pure white. There's also, and I bought this from RG Crystals like a decade ago, synthetic peridot. I think it had iron added to it, but it looks exactly like Pakistani peridot. And if you look at it in the right conditions, you can see some of the pleochroism that natural peridot is supposed to show. So yeah, synthetic forsterite is a great imitator of other natural things. And then Ray has a question.
I have a specific interest in opals, and I know it's not one of your faceted beauties, but it definitely is one of the things that's been synthesized and it's considered a precious stone. Do either of you have any comments about discerning natural from synthetic in terms of opals?
Yeah, so I've got a little bit, and then I'll let Olga take over because opals aren't one of my specialties. Typically, for the older synthetic opals, they had this kind of odd honeycomb-looking appearance. It was like little columns that grew upwards. And if you cut the opal correctly per the manufacturers, you wouldn't really see that. But if you like looked at it at certain angles, or if somebody had cut the opal specifically to show that feature, it's immediately visible and it's very obviously synthetic. But I don't know much about opal. So Olga, do you guys do synthetic opal?
Well, yeah, we do. Now we do a lot of them. So we have types that are more polymer, more acrylic than an opal, like Aurora opal or Lee hybrid opal. So that's around 80% of polymer there and like around 20% of silica. We're also doing impregnated opal, which is only 15-20% of polymer and the rest is silica, which already looks much better. And we still have some old stocks of Gilson opal, which is 100%. So that's silica, and then the second component. Arya, you should help me.
I don't remember. I'm not good with opals.
Zircon and silica. So maybe let me show you some examples of how that's gonna look.
The Japanese and Gilson both were creating pretty reasonable looking opals.
So yeah, that's mostly polymer. So if you hold this piece, you feel like some kind of plastic. As well as this one, that's an Aurora opal, 80% of plastic. We also have this one, which is 20% of polymer only, which is already much better, I think, and plenty of colors. And that's an old Gilson, which honestly I love a lot. That's this jelly looking piece with a regular pattern. So yeah, I think that's something that you want to see in an opal. I mean, if it's a lab grown one.
Yeah,
And
the
that's again
original,
that's a new technology. That's a non-resin opal which has zero polymer in it.
the
Yeah, so
original
opals
opals,
are very interesting. Yeah, sorry.
the original synthetics actually, before they got them a little better off, you could dent them with your fingernail. And I've got some from Gilson and Chatham actually that were pretty darn realistic looking in their flame patterns. And now I'm seeing ads online for rings being created out of the synthetic opals, which look pretty impressive. Although I don't imagine they're any more durable than regular opal.
No, probably not.
Well, thank you for trying to answer that. Are there any other questions? Actually, I must tell you two, you should feel quite proud that I've never so far had so many questions posed in a symposium that we've done online like this as you got today. So good for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I
Thank
think there
you.
was one person who wanted to show an unusual synthetic. I can't remember who
I
that
think that was Jolion.
Yeah, that was me. Okay, hold on a second. So yeah, this is not one of your classic gem materials, but this is interesting anyway. Let me just share this. And this is synthetic banded malachite from, this was a gift that was given to me from St. Petersburg University in Moscow when I went to visit them a few years back, part of a research project there. So they were trying to generate stalactitic malachite in a synthetic form. So I'm assuming that the holes are where they had some kind of, I think it was copper rods stuck in there for it to nucleate around. I don't know the exact process where it was, how it was made, but I'm sure that you can guess from looking at it.
I have never seen synthetic malachite before.
I thought it
Neither.
would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's much of it in existence. This was part of one, I imagine it was just someone's master's or PhD project at the university that they were doing. And I was very fortunate to be able to walk away with this.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think people's PhD theses are typically where a lot of unusual stuff comes from.
Mm.
The only growth of flux-grown iolite that I've ever heard of, which is also the only synthetic iolite I've ever heard of, was from a PhD thesis. If like you keep an eye out for these in like the crystal growth journals or things like that, every so often you'll see something that's just this bizarre. And this synthetic malachite is clearly like one of those bizarre things.
One
Well, I
last
thought you'd-
question. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, I thought you'd enjoy that.
Well, it certainly was unique. One last question I'm going to throw to both Arya and Olga is this. Ed Perry, who's the one that has created the hyper edge laps that a lot of the big cutters are using, has in his inventory of materials some synthetic alexandrite, and he claims that it doesn't give the normal color change that you get. And I got a hint of this when you were talking, that there's the color split in synthetic alexandrite is not the normal one that we have expected from the Urals in Russia in natural form, but it's a whole different spectrum of colors.
Yeah, so I can address that. So in any alexandrite, the color, both the color and the color change comes from chromium. But there's two different ways that the chromium can be completely different. So one of them, it can be in its 3+ charge or its 4+ charge. And the proportion of 3+ to 4+ makes a huge difference, both in terms of the final color and the color change. The other feature is that in alexandrite, there's two, like if you look at the the unit cell of the crystal. So like, where are each of the atoms in relation to each other? There's two different places where chromium can fit in. And there's the aluminum 1 site and the aluminum 2 site. So the amount of chromium that's in one site versus the other also has a huge impact on the color, really more of the color change, but also a little bit of the final color. So when Creative Crystals was doing their experiments in the 70s, they deliberately changed their flux conditions, like what they're dissolving it in. They deliberately changed their temperature conditions, and like they changed a bunch of factors to try and very specifically target, okay, like how do we get the right amount of 3+? How do we get the right amount of 4+? How do we make sure that it's in the right spot in the crystal? And that's how they were able to get the synthetic alexandrite that was perfectly like top Russian material.
Yeah.
When you grow it for laser purposes, you don't actually want it to be perfect for gem purposes, because then it's a less efficient laser. There's also not a huge amount of in-depth scientific investigation into growing it by the pulled method, which is what everybody uses nowadays. And like, what conditions do you have to do to get it to turn out that way? So the reason that the majority of synthetic alexandrite on the market now doesn't have that perfect natural color change is basically because we don't have the body of knowledge to be able to target it.
Mhm. Well, thank you very much, Olga, for getting up at this god-awful time of the morning to contribute to what we're doing, because your comments and pictures were invaluable. And, Arya, thank you for the work you put into this. I know you're a busy man, so you know, not only do you do your medicine, but you're doing cutting and you're putting together a program like this. So thank you for that. Thank you, audience, for taking the time to join us. And do remember that next month we're going to be having me talking about rare and exotic mineral gems. And in November, we're going to get Ari back along with some other experts yet to be determined. So you can want, anybody knows someone who's good on synthetic diamonds, let me know, please. So we want to get someone interesting as Ari is, so he doesn't overwhelm them because of his, his big smile and everything and his good knowledge. So we need to get someone to talk to us about synthetic diamonds. And so that's 2 months from now. And so next month, rare and exotic gems you may not be using in jewelry every day, but you may want to know about. And in November, synthetic diamonds and their simulants. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much for participating, Ari and Olga. God bless you both for your time and energy and your enthusiasm. And I'm hoping to see you again in Tucson, Olga, to see some more interesting synthetics. Thank you for what you guys do. Thank you for what you do also, Arya. I heard a number of people saying, including Olga, everybody knows Arya. I thought, wow, this guy is far more well known than I even knew before I got in touch with you. So yeah, thank Elsa for that. Anyway, you guys have a great day. Have a great weekend, what's left of it. And please look forward, take care of yourselves. And we'll see you a month from now. And I'm going to sign off now. Thank you, Jolion, for as usual, performing as you did so well with our technological aspects. And I do hope we'll be seeing some more archived programs so that people can look back and find programs they'd like to see again.
Yes.
So thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Take care. Bye-bye.
Time to go to bed, Olga. Get.
Yeah, thanks. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Ray, for everything.
Thank you, Eyes.
Okay. All right. I'll try and have this program up this week on the online.
Oh, God bless you. Thanks very much.
Okay.